Gaslighting. Gaslighting is a systematic form of mental abuse where the manipulator forces the target to doubt their own perceptions, memories, and sanity. It often begins with small, trivial lies that gradually escalate into a total reconstruction of reality. The manipulator might insist that a conversation never happened, move physical objects and deny doing so, or tell the victim that their friends and family are lying to them. By persistently denying the truth, the manipulator erodes the victim's ability to trust their own senses. This creates a psychological vacuum where the victim becomes entirely dependent on the manipulator to define what is true and what is false. Over time, the victim loses their sense of self, becoming hyper-anxious and constantly apologizing for mistakes that never occurred. The power of gaslighting lies in its persistence. It is not a one-time lie, but a relentless campaign of psychological wear and tear that leaves the target feeling mentally unstable and isolated. Love bombing. Love bombing is an aggressive recruitment tactic used to build an intense, artificial bond in a very short amount of period. The manipulator showers the target with excessive affection, constant communication, and grand promises of a future together. This creates a dopamine loop in the victim's brain, making them feel uniquely seen and valued. However, this intensity is not based on genuine connection. It is a tool used to bypass the victim's natural defenses and boundaries. By establishing themselves as the perfect partner or perfect friend, the manipulator creates a high standard of validation that they can later threaten to withdraw. Once the victim is hooked, the manipulator begins the devaluation phase, where the affection is suddenly replaced by coldness or criticism. The victim, now addicted to the initial bombing, will do anything, including compromising their values, to win back the manipulator's favor and return to the honeymoon phase. The door-in-the-face technique. The door-in-the-face technique relies on the psychological principle of reciprocal concessions. The manipulator begins by making a request so large and unreasonable that the target is almost guaranteed to refuse it. This initial refusal, this slamming of the door, creates a subtle sense of guilt or social tension. The manipulator then immediately follows up with a second, much smaller request. To the target, this second request feels like a generous compromise or a step down from the original demand. Because the manipulator appears to have made a concession, the target feels a social obligation to reciprocate by agreeing to the smaller task. In reality, the smaller task was the manipulator's goal all along. This technique is highly effective in sales and negotiations because it frames the desired outcome as a favor to the victim rather than a calculated demand. Triangulation. Triangulation involves the introduction of a third party into a dyadic relationship to create friction, jealousy, or a sense of competition. Instead of communicating directly with the target, the manipulator uses he said, she said tactics to suggest that someone else is more competent, more attractive, or more loyal than the target. This forces the target into a defensive position where they feel they must compete for the manipulator's approval. By keeping the target in a state of perpetual insecurity, the manipulator ensures that the target remains focused on them and distracted from the manipulator's own flaws or lies. Triangulation can happen in romantic relationships, in the workplace, or within families. It serves to break down the target's support network by making them suspicious of the third party, effectively isolating the victim and making them easier to control. Guilt tripping. Guilt tripping is a form of emotional coercion where the manipulator uses the target's conscience and empathy against them. By framing themselves as a perpetual victim or by highlighting the target's failings, the manipulator forces the victim to act out of obligation rather than genuine desire. Phrases such as, "after all I've done for you," or "I guess my needs just don't matter," are common tools in this arsenal. The goal is to make the target feel that they owe the manipulator something or that they are responsible for the manipulator's emotional state. This technique is particularly effective against people with high levels of empathy or a strong sense of responsibility. It turns the relationship into a transaction where the target is constantly paying off an imaginary emotional debt, allowing the manipulator to dictate behavior without ever making a direct demand. Mirroring. Mirroring is the calculated imitation of a target's behaviors, interests, speech patterns, and values. While natural mirroring happens in healthy social interactions, manipulative mirroring is a conscious strategy used to build a false sense of rapport. The manipulator studies the target to identify their insecurities and desires, then reflects those traits back to them. This creates a soulmate illusion, where the target believes they have found someone who finally gets them. Because humans are naturally inclined to trust people who are similar to themselves, mirroring allows the manipulator to bypass the target's skepticism. Once this false trust is established, the target is much more likely to share sensitive information or comply with requests, believing they are helping someone who is just like them. Moving the goalposts. Moving the goalposts is a tactic designed to keep a person in a state of perpetual inadequacy. Every time the target achieves a goal or meets a requirement set by the manipulator changes the criteria for success. If a worker completes a project on time, the manipulator might criticize the formatting. If a partner changes a behavior as requested, the manipulator finds a new, unrelated flaw to focus on. The objective is to ensure that the target never feels a sense of accomplishment or security. By keeping the target chasing a moving target, the manipulator maintains a power imbalance where they are the sole judge of what is good enough. This technique destroys the target's self-esteem and keeps them focused on gaining the manipulator's elusive approval. The silent treatment. The silent treatment, or stonewalling, is a passive-aggressive form of emotional punishment. By refusing to speak, make eye contact, or acknowledge the target's presence, the manipulator creates an environment of intense anxiety. Humans are social creatures, and being ignored triggers a social pain response in the brain that is similar to physical pain. The target often becomes so desperate to end the silence and restore the connection that they will apologize for things they didn't do or agree to terms they previously rejected. The silent treatment allows the manipulator to maintain control without having to engage in an actual argument. It is a way of saying, "Your feelings do not exist until I decide they do," and it forces the target to take full responsibility for the repair of the relationship.